Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burgess-Wilson. You are watching a special edition of W News. Coming up on today's programme. Hezbollah confirms the news announced earlier today by the Israeli army that their leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed in Friday evening's airstrike on the suburbs of the Lebanese capital. Nasrallah, who was 64 years old, had not been seen in public for years. His location was a closely guarded secret. In a statement, Hezbollah is vowing to continue its fight. As strikes continue in Lebanon, we'll be getting updates and analysis from across the region, and we'll be asking, what does Nasrallah's death mean for Lebanon, Israel, and the entire Middle East? Hello and thank you for joining us for this special bulletin dedicated entirely to events in Lebanon. This morning, the Israeli military announced that the leader of Hezbollah had been killed during yesterday evening's massive airstrike on the southern Beirut suburb of Dahir. Well, the news of Nasrallah's death has now been confirmed by Hezbollah. The group issued a statement in the last couple of hours. Well, Hassan Nasrallah, who was 64 years old, had been the leader of the Lebanese Shia militant group for more than 30 years. He took the reins of Hezbollah in 1992 after his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was assassinated. This is how the IDF announced his death. Well, this evening, the Lebanese Prime Minister is holding an extraordinary meeting of his cabinet, and across the country there is a sense of shock and anticipation about what might happen next. All the while, Israel is continuing its strikes on Lebanon and has hit more than 140 targets across the country today alone. Well, during the course of these last 6 days, more than 800 people are known to have been killed there in Lebanon.
Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the terrorist army Hezbollah, was killed by Israel Defense Forces in a precise strike in Beirut last night while he was in Hezbollah's central headquarters commanding more imminent attacks against the people of Israel. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of an evil terrorist organization, the senior terrorists eliminated with him, and the central headquarters were a legitimate military target under international law. Israel does not seek a wider escalation.
Spokesperson there for the Israeli military. Well, there's been a reaction to the news of Nasrallah's death from across Lebanon and indeed across the world. In rebel-held areas of Syria, the news was greeted with celebrations and the honking of horns. This was the scene in the city of Idlib. Meanwhile, in parts of Beirut, people wept openly in the streets as Hezbollah confirmed the news that its leader had indeed been killed in Friday night's strike. Well, I'm joined now by the deputy editor of L'Orient Le Jour's political desk, Saleh Hijazi. Saleh, thank you for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Hezbollah has confirmed this news in a statement. Just tell us a bit about how this news was announced.
It actually took some time. Yesterday, when the strike happened, everyone was pretty much sure that this strike was not an ordinary attack. It was meant to eliminate someone very important. And right after we saw the fire and saw the blast, we realized that it might be Hassan Nasrallah who was the target of this operation, and rumors started going on. And then Israeli media published reports citing sources in Israel saying that it was indeed Nasrallah that was targeted by this attack, and that was like 8 p.m. yesterday. And since then, we've been waiting for any kind of confirmation or denial from Hezbollah that we only got around 1 hour ago, saying that its leader was actually killed.
Yeah, indeed. The reaction we were getting last night suggested that Nasrallah was actually all right and that he was safe. And then, as you say, in the last couple of hours, this confirmation that he's dead. What's been the reaction in Lebanon up until this point? I mean, have there been people taking to the streets? I'm assuming people are shocked. I'm assuming they're afraid. Are people also sad?
There's a huge amount of shock right now, especially both in the opposition and in the pro-Hezbollah circles, because this was the de facto leader of the country for years now. And his death equates to power vacuum and uncertainty. We don't know what will become of Hezbollah. If Hezbollah will remain a powerful actor here, who is going to lead that party? Is it going to be a more radical person, a moderate? We don't know, especially that both candidates for succession of Hassan Nasrallah might have been killed in the attack. We're talking about Hashim Safiyuddin and Naim Qasim. There's a lot of uncertainty going on about their fate. So this adds to the shock and to the sadness that some people, especially the ones that belong to the party's popular base, are feeling. It is really quite a shock for them, because they've always seen Nasrallah as this heroic God-sent victor.
Yeah, I mean, his safety...
And now suddenly he is a... Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I was going to say his safety and security were really closely guarded. Where he was the source of enormous speculation. No one knew. And people always speculated all the time I ever visited Lebanon. There was always, where is Hassan Nasrallah? His death suggests, doesn't it, that Hezbollah has been infiltrated at the very highest level.
Definitely. Actually, when the attack happened, we were able to see it from our building at Loyon Le Jour, and what we told each other is that he's been there all the time. We've been always wondering where he was hiding, and he's just been like, we could see his whereabouts from our office, which is fascinating. And indeed, the fact that this is probably the biggest secret that Hezbollah holds. It's Nasrallah's lifestyle was always surrounded with a great deal of secrecy and precaution. It's been said that he doesn't have a phone. It's been said that he never goes out. So now, all this was meant and targeted towards protecting him and keeping his whereabouts secret. The fact that it's been leaked to the Israelis implies, as you said, that the party is really infiltrated, and it's probably going to undergo some kind of workshop about that, like some kind of changes.
Indeed, some people thought Hassan Nasrallah might in fact be a resident in Iran and not in Lebanon at all. So again, a lot of people will be very surprised by these developments. I just want to ask you lastly, I mean, what's been happening in Lebanon today? Because we've got reports that there have been fresh strikes carried out by Israel across the country, not just in Beirut, elsewhere as well. Tell us more.
Yes. After the attack against Hassan Nasrallah, there was a series of very strong and very frequent bombings in the southern suburb, as well as in the south, and in the Bekaa, as well as in Druze area, which is new. And now it feels like it's going on. It feels like it might become the new normal for this war, at least for these coming days. The Ministry of Health is reporting that since yesterday, 11 people were killed, but the real number is probably way higher because there's a lot of people under the rubble.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Salah Hijazi, Deputy Editor of Loyon Le Jour's Political Desk. Thank you very much indeed. This evening, smoke is lingering over the southern suburbs of Beirut, where Israel, as we've just been hearing, has been carrying out fresh strikes today. Well, let's get reaction to this news now from the former Lebanese ambassador to Jordan, Tracy Shamoun. Tracy, of course, you resigned, did you not, following on from the Beirut port blast. I'd just like to start by asking you for your thoughts. I mean, what went through your mind when you received this news?
Well, we've lived with this expectation for a very long time, and the Israelis have said in the past that they know where he is, and they have made, these veiled threats about being able to kill him. And so it's rather surprising that Nasrallah would put himself in such jeopardy. I mean, the Dahiya, the southern suburbs, have been under threat and under attack from Israel since the beginning of these events. And for the meeting to take place at the Hezbollah headquarters and for Nasrallah to be present was, I think, rather reckless on his part, if we understand the implications of his death, which is huge for Lebanon and for the region.
Indeed. And what do you think the reaction is across Lebanon on this day? I mean, we've talked about shock and anger. I mean, presumably there's a great deal of fear, there's a great deal of sadness. And as we've seen, some people aren't at all sad and they've welcomed this news.
Yes, you're going to have a real mixture of reactions. Hezbollah and Nasrallah was a very polarizing figure in Lebanese politics. And so you're either for him or against him. Now, we have a very mixed population. We're made up of Sunni, Shia, and Christians. Since the events in Gaza, the Sunnis have become closer to the Shia and therefore, are going to be rather, sad and concerned about the loss of Nasrallah because their battle is also, to help the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause. On the Christian community, the Christians are divided. You have half the Christians who are with Hezbollah and half who are against. Now, half of those who are against obviously are jubilating and happy and celebrating. And this polarity can cause a lot of problems internally. It can lead to incidents and communal, confrontations and injuries and slights. And so it's a very delicate situation now, which poses a lot of internal security and community threats.
I mean, do you think we're looking here now at an inevitable escalation, or could this be the point at which Israel says, right, we've done what we set out to achieve, and that draws a line under the conflict?
Well, I think that Hassan Nasrallah is Netanyahu's Rubicon, and he's now crossed it. And for years he's been crying wolf with regard to Iran, and now he's brought the wolf to his doorstep. So if you read the news today, you find that the Iranians have said that they're going to start recruiting troops to send to Lebanon. So he's literally brought Iran to the border, to Israel's border. Whereas before, the Iranian attacks were remote and far and not that successful. We risk now becoming another Syria with, an Iranian-supported front on the border with Israel, fighting Israel. And it's become very, very dangerous. Of course, this is going to drag in, the West and the United States. And it's exactly what I think Netanyahu and his government have wanted all along, is to broaden this conflagration and this battle and this war, to bring Iran in, to bring the US in, and to be vindicated in their cause.
Given how degraded Hezbollah has been in recent weeks by events that we've been covering extensively on this channel, the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, these targeted attacks taking out senior figures within Hezbollah, and given the degree to which that group appears to have been infiltrated and intelligence leaks seem to have enabled Israel to do what they've done in the last couple of weeks. I mean, do you think we might see a surrender from Hezbollah and the group disband, or do you think that's a completely unlikely scenario and defiance and more fighting is the more likely way forward?
Yes, absolutely. More defiance, more fighting. And I think that, at this point, there's going to be a regrouping and a reconstitution of the Hezbollah war machine. I think they're going to obviously appoint a new head of Hezbollah, and Hashim Safieddine or Naim Qassem are really the favorites. And as the gentleman before me said, their fates are uncertain. But with the help of Iran and continued military support of Iran, this front will continue. And also for Hezbollah, just bombing the north, 1 or 2 rockets a day, 4 rockets a day, is enough to deter the return of the Israeli people to their homes in the north. And in that sense, it's a kind of victory for Hezbollah, because Netanyahu has been waging this war with Lebanon on that pretext. And that is not something that he's going to secure. He's not going to secure complete peace. Now, yesterday, what happened and what's going on right now is that Israel is going in and taking out all the munitions depots and weapons depots of Hezbollah. And this could also be in anticipation of the next stage of their plan, which is a ground invasion. And that ground invasion will be to secure the border. But then again, they are putting themselves in a position where they might lose all the advantages that they've had previously by conducting this war from a distance and with technology. Once they have boots on the ground in Lebanon, they're on Hezbollah's territory. So it remains to be seen how things are going to develop from here. But I can tell you it's not going to be good.
OK, you don't sound at all optimistic. I mean, allow me to paint a different scenario and ask you what you think of it, which is, the cabinet is meeting, I think, as we speak, there in Lebanon, and an extraordinary session of the cabinet in Beirut. Is there some potential, if Lebanon's politicians play their cards right and they're well advised by their allies, and Lebanon has lots of allies, and there are lots of interested parties who want Lebanon not to descend into a full-blown war with Israel, quite the opposite. Could there be some potential, if cards are played skillfully, for this to be a sort of a reset moment for Lebanon, the dawning of a new era, and one in which perhaps some of the divisions that have really paralyzed politics in Lebanon are done away with?
I would like it to be, honestly. But that would require the Lebanese government taking severe measures, and the Lebanese army also acting in concert with the government, beginning to curtail Hezbollah's actions and also putting an end to their military presence on the border with Lebanon. Now, that is a very, very complicated matter in light of the fact that our Lebanese army is constituted by a large percentage of Shia soldiers. So it's very delicate. And it's going to have to be handled with great care. In addition to which, as you know, we don't have a president. And so I think that the best thing that the Lebanese government can do now is to normalize the political situation by electing a president. The other thing is that the parliament now is going to, suffer from a lot of vacancies, because a lot of the senior members of parliament of Hezbollah were killed in that attack on their headquarters. So we're also looking at maybe having to conduct, parliamentary elections to fill those vacancies. So there's a lot of things that need to be regulated and brought back into, constitutional jurisdiction.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Tracy Shamoun, thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, for a more international perspective on these developments in Lebanon, let's cross to the United Kingdom, and we can speak to the former British Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon. Sir Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How do you think this news is likely to have been received by the British government?
Well, I think they'll be concerned, obviously, at anything that might further escalate the conflict. I think the West has been worried about that all along, and there is no easy end in sight to this. Everybody wants to try and find a way to reduce the slaughter, to reduce the civilian casualties on either side of the border. And if the West can help play a role in that, and they may well now be examining how they might possibly do that, I think that everybody's ready to do so. And that does mean, as you've suggested, stiffening up the Lebanese government. That was the agreement after the last ceasefire nearly 20 years ago, that the Lebanese government would get a grip of the militia, that the Hezbollah would withdraw out of the border area, that it would disarm. And if you look at it from Israel's point of view, none of those things have actually happened. And they will have to now be revisited. As you said, the Lebanese government, its politicians, if they want to save their country, really, however difficult it is, they're going to have to step up. And the international community, which is passing resolutions at the moment, but it's got to now do more than that. It's got to understand Israel's right to exist within its borders and to have its people near the border areas living peacefully. And it's got to understand that, Iran can't be allowed to go on fueling these conflicts, supplying arms to aggressors whether they're in Lebanon or whether those Russia attacking Ukraine. You know, Iran has got to accept its international responsibilities, and if it won't, then the sanctions have got to be increased.
Do you think Lebanon's friends, and I'm assuming you consider that the UK is a friend of Lebanon, do you think that the British government has people speaking to people in Beirut at this very moment, giving them constructive advice and giving them suggestions as to how they're going to dig the country out of this dark hole that it's in at the moment?
Yes, I'm sure that's happening at the moment, and we've given them a lot of advice over the years. We've given them a lot of help. The British Army's been in there helping train the Lebanese forces, particularly up in the north. They've had a lot of help. We have a very strong relationship with Lebanon. Let's be clear, everybody wants to see Lebanon survive and Lebanon get through this particular crisis. But it's not enough for Lebanon just to say, the international community has got to sort this. There are things, and you've pointed to them, that the Lebanese government can and should be doing. Lebanese politicians, however difficult it is, with the various complex Lebanese politics there, however difficult it is, Lebanese politicians have really got to step up now and do their bit. That's what they committed to after the last ceasefire back in 2006. And that, of course, is what simply didn't happen and allowed Hezbollah to regroup, to rearm, and to move back to the southern area and start its missile attacks all over again on Israel.
Do you see us reaching a point where the British and the Americans feel at some point compelled to intervene, given that we are talking about a very dangerous moment for the region, and one in which there's been talk of spillover, there's been talk of an expanded, broader regional conflict for quite some time now. I mean, were that to become a reality, do you see Britain and its allies deploying more troops to the region and actually getting actively involved?
I don't think deploying troops, will be top of the agenda. Obviously, there are various amount of planning going on at the moment about evacuating civilians and so on, and helping, protect Israeli airspace. But I don't think it's going to come to actively deploying Western troops, and I'm not sure deploying American or British troops at this point, will work. But on the other hand, the peacekeeping troops that have been deployed, of course, have turned out to be useless. They've not been able to prevent what is happening in the south of Lebanon. Now, they've done their best. The Irish troops with the United Nations berries, they've done their best, but that isn't enough. And it may be that, further steps have to be considered that fall short of actually putting boots on the ground.
Indeed, and it's just going to be interesting as well to see how Iran responds to all of this. Of course, Iran extremely angry, listening to what the Ayatollah was saying earlier on today. And of course, just last week, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was one of the people whose pager exploded, and he was injured by that. I mean, clearly Iran very closely connected to all of these events, and we've been saying that throughout this program. But how do you think Iran is going to respond now?
Well, I did wonder why the Iranian ambassador, what he was doing with the Hezbollah pager. But, leave that aside. I hope Iran will, take a very deep breath now and think very seriously about the likely implications. They've been, they've been caught out supplying arms to aid the Russian attack on Ukraine. They've been supplying arms to aid Hezbollah's attack on Israel. And that is not acceptable for a member of the international community, which is why there are more sanctions, why the sanctions this very month have been stepped up, and why they're likely to be enforced even more rigorously than the existing sanctions, and why at the moment, Iran will continue to be treated as a pariah. As a serious member of the international community, Iran has to accept its international obligations, and that includes, of course, accepting Israel's right to exist and to live peacefully within its own borders.
So, Michael, I'd like to get your opinion on a piece that I read by the director of Chatham House in London. Bronwyn Maddock said today, and I quote, "One of the interesting things that I think has come out of the past week is just how little influence the US appears to have." I'm assuming she's talking about Israel. I think it was in the context of Israel not listening to its allies. What do you make of that opinion?
Well, I think it's been generally true over the last few years that American influence in the Middle East has been declining. And I think American interest in the Middle East has been declining. They've been there, they did an awful lot to help suppress the Daesh takeover of Syria and Iraq. But since then, I think American influence, has certainly waned in the region, and other players have got more involved. So there's a lot of Chinese involvement, for example, now in the Gulf that wasn't true 15 or 20 years ago. So that is certainly true. But on the other hand, in the end, America is important to the region, is of course a key supporter and upholder of Israel's right to exist and to live peacefully within its borders, and in the supply of defensive weapons to allow Israel to do that. And I'm pretty sure, that will continue, whoever wins the next presidential election.
Yeah, we're just hearing from Iran, in fact, the country's president saying that the United States cannot deny complicity in the killing of Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. What do you make of that?
I think that's ridiculous. The cause of this problem, the cause of this current conflict, of course, has been Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, who have triggered this by their constant attacks on Israel, on Israeli territory, on Israeli citizens, who, as I've said repeatedly, do have the right to exist peacefully within their borders, and they have the responsibility for that. And Iran bears an even greater responsibility because it has been, in contradiction to the previous ceasefire, it has been arming Hezbollah and has been the source of the rockets that are falling on civilians in Israel itself.
And just lastly, I think, it does look like Israel listens to US advice and then goes off and sometimes does something quite different or quite unexpected as far as Washington is concerned. That's the perception one gets. Do you think that's a genuine perception? And do you think Benjamin Netanyahu's calculation is, the Biden administration and is in its final months, therefore we'll do what we want to do?
Well, Israel, America is a very good friend of Israel. Israel is a rare democracy in the Middle East. And what Israel is faced with at the moment is something quite existential. Is a very direct threat to its citizens, attacks on its borders, and it's determined, with or without the help of its friends, to do what it has to do to defend itself. And that does mean occasionally, yes, they will not simply take instructions from the United States or the rest of the international community, and they will defend themselves. And, it does come back to my earlier point. The international community has more to do than simply passing resolutions. We've got to rethink why the original ceasefire was not properly respected and to do what we can, particularly to control Iran's aggressive supply of weapons and its encouragement of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
OK, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Sir Michael Fallon, the former British Defence Secretary. Thank you very much indeed. The Israeli military said a short while ago that the killing of Hassan Nasrallah made the world a safer place, describing him as one of Israel's greatest enemies. Well, the military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, added that his forces will continue to work to track down other senior members of the Iran-backed group. Well, let's get some more analysis so we can speak to the former IDF Deputy Director of Military Intelligence, retired Brigadier General Dr. Meir Elran. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya. Do you think there is a feeling that Israel is safer as a result of the death of Hassan Nasrallah, or does Israel now face an even greater threat from Iran than it did before?
Well, I think that what happened yesterday with the targeting of Nasrallah and his gang in Beirut is a major achievement for Israel, as far as it's very, very complicated and long, bad relations with Hezbollah. The point of the matter is that I think that we have the momentum right here. We have to continue with our operations, military operations, to dismantle Hezbollah as much as possible and as soon as possible. I think it is now much more possible than it was, let's say, 2 weeks ago. And if that really happens, or if we are approaching this dramatic point of dismantling at least the major part of the military capacities of Hezbollah, I think it will be very important for Lebanon, it will be very important for Israel, it will be very significant for the Middle East security in general. And I would add to that also that it is crucial for the safety and stability of the world at large. Once this happens, I think that Israel and Lebanon could start working together with our friends in the region and the international community headed by the United States and the European countries to restructure the entire strategic structure of the Middle East. I think that it is possible, it is desired, and I think that we'll have to work together. It will not be easy, but we'll have to work together to make this happen, and the sooner the better.
Sure, and I mean, taking out, killing Hassan Nasrallah and those pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, the other targeted assassinations, I mean, it does look and feel like Hezbollah has been attacked from the inside out. It's been infiltrated and degraded in a major way. This must have taken years of planning on the part of Israel, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think that Israel started working on these issues very meticulously since the Second Lebanon War, which was back in 2006. And since then, I think that the preparations were very serious, based on excellent intelligence and also on the capacities of the Air Force mostly. And I think that really it has been a remarkable step forward to secure the Middle East in general, and also I would say Lebanon, not to mention, of course, our own situation in the north. You have to remember that Hezbollah has been devastating our northern communities for the last 12 months. And it's time for order to be reconstructed. We have to work very, very seriously with our friends and allies in the Middle East and outside of the Middle East, so as to open a new horizon, a new positive and constructive kind of a horizon, which is important and possible for us to have sometime soon.
What do you think the events of the last 10 days or so say to Hezbollah? What's the message here that Israel is sending out?
The message is very, very clear. Whoever is trying to mess with us will pay the price, and will pay a very high price. And I would add to that even further, that the situation right now is that Hezbollah has to be at least marginalized, but mostly for the security of the Middle East, has to be dismantled. It has to disappear from the scene. It has to give up its military capacities, and it has to be controlled as a political party, if so wish, by the Lebanese government. I think that it is possible. I think it's high time for the Lebanese government, together with Israel and with other countries in the region and in the world at large, to resume its sovereign role as far as its territory is concerned. I think this will open a new horizon for us and for everybody else. I seriously think that it is possible if we just keep up with our momentum, with a thrust. I think we can still do that. We have the capacities to do that. I think it's possible.
Okay, so that's sort of an optimistic take on how things might eventually unfold. But between now and then, what do you think might happen next? What sorts of eventualities do you think Israel is prepared for? And do you think a ground invasion looks increasingly likely?
I don't think that it's necessary right now. I think that the air strikes have proven to be very, very effective. I think our defense capacities has to be held. I think that we have the capacity to do that. And we have to be very careful about the chaotic situation that apparently is going to emerge in Lebanon itself. We don't know what's happening with the chain of command and control of Hezbollah. Hopefully it has been disrupted in a major way, which means possibly that some local commanders, local groups of Hezbollah spread all over the place might do some things which might be, which might present kind of some kind of a threat. This was actually the case in the last few hours since the action has been taken, since the strike on Beirut has been taking place. We see that they are launching rockets and missiles against mostly the northern part of Israel. And it is a major risk that we have to take into consideration. I think that our air defense systems and the conduct of the Israeli civilian population is very remarkable and very, very effective so far. At the same time, I must say that to a lower extent of, probability, we have to take into consideration also that the Iranians might respond to that. So far, they have been, in the last few weeks and months, they have been quite cautious not to engage with Israel militarily in some kind of a response or another. I hope that they keep up with this kind of a pattern of conduct, but we have to take into consideration that the opposite can happen. If that happens, they will face a very strong defense on the part of Israel, as was the case also back in April. And in that case, we have our allies to be on our side, and together we can do a fine job in terms of not only deterring the Iranians, but also keeping them in a situation that would not be a success for them, but rather another humiliating failure. This is, again, something that I think can happen. We have the Americans here with us and the other countries, both local and international. And I think that the Iranians are very aware of that. There are also other things that happen inside Iran to counter any kind of a mistake, I would say, strategic mistake on their part. And I think that they should, and actually I believe that they do, they consider very, very carefully the odds of such a response on their part.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, we're getting some, obviously there's a fast-moving story. Lots is happening, even as you've been speaking. We're getting reports of explosions in central Israel, air raid sirens reported to be sounding in parts of central Israel, as well as in Tel Aviv. We're also hearing from the Russians urging Israel to immediately cease military operations in Lebanon. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I was going to ask you, just lastly, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has been under fire for quite some time. Politically, people have said his survival is in jeopardy for quite some time. And I'm just wondering, with a coup like this, the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, who is, really public enemy, probably number one in Israel, I think it was fair to say, do you think that's given him politically something of a boost?
Well, I would suggest to the people who are watching us to understand that Israel is a vibrant democracy. We had our own share of problems domestically in the last few years. I mean, unfortunately, our democracy has been unstable for some time, but we have our own system of governance. And I think that it is totally separate from the military situation that we are exposed to. We are going to win this war one way or another, I hope sooner than later. And then we will attend to our domestic problems in a democratic manner in accordance with our norms and values.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Much appreciated, Dr. Meir Elran. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So a fast-developing story that we've got our eye very closely fixed on at the moment. And Israel maintains that under international law, the Hezbollah headquarters in Beirut, where the group's leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed last night, was a legitimate military target. Lots of reaction coming in from around the world. Let's get some perspective from the United States, and we can speak to the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and the Pentagon's former top policy official for the Middle East. Mick Mulroy, great to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Put this into perspective for our viewers. Just how significant, viewed from the United States, is the news of Hassan Nasrallah's death?
Good to be with you and your audience. I do think from the United States, obviously, the United States has been pushing very hard to get a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, which seems to be further and further away than it ever has, and then was focused on getting a ceasefire in the conflict that's currently raging between Israel and Hezbollah, and had recently, right before this started, pushed the idea that they were going to get an agreement to do that for 21 days. So this isn't something the United States, I think, would have wanted to see based on their efforts for a ceasefire. But I think it's also fair to say that if the U.S. was in the shoes of Israel, they wouldn't have missed an opportunity to take out the leader of the U.S. designated terrorist organization that was attacking the United States. So I think there is hesitation on just how critical they are on this escalatory effort by Israel. And I think they would acknowledge it was escalatory because the United States, if put in the same position, I think, and any country, quite frankly, would have taken the opportunity, because until there's a ceasefire, there's not a ceasefire.
And what's your reaction to the discovery that we've all made in the last 24 hours that Hassan Nasrallah was, in a way, hiding in plain sight? And we'd all speculated about where he was hiding out. Did he have a bunker here? Was he in a different country? He was actually in the Beirut suburbs. He was in Dahiyeh. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't think it's surprising. It seems like most of the individuals that Israel has been targeting have been trying to hide amongst civilians because they at least believed that that would make him much more secure than if they were, say, in a isolated area, even in a bunker. It would militarily and politically be easier for Israel or any country to strike their base into a populated area and, of course, have all these civilian casualties. So I think Israel has obviously determined that, just like the previous assassination strikes in Beirut, and realized that essentially that was the parameters that they had to deal with, and calculated that it was worth taking that strike and the political backlash from the civilian casualties.
You know the region well. You're an expert on the Middle East. I mean, in terms of succession planning, do you think Hezbollah will announce in the near future the replacement head who will take over from Hassan Nasrallah? And will that make will the choice of candidate, the choice of person, make a huge difference to how the group is managed? Or is it just a figurehead with Iran really just pulling the strings?
So when it comes to the military chain of command, there's usually a very quick succession because you expect in a military conflict that they will be treated pretty quickly. So you have to have a very clear line of chain of command. When you have someone like Hassan Nasrallah, who is, larger than life when it comes to Hezbollah and the institution and the organization's cooperation with Iran, he's almost irreplaceable. So even if you have another individual that can technically be the Secretary General, he can't really replace Nasrallah. He was not only the political leader, he was a figurehead and an icon in their institution. So they likely will have one. They'll probably be a little hesitant to say exactly who it is because he'll go to the top of Israel's target list. And Iran, I think right now is really trying to determine how to respond. I mean, they haven't responded to Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran, and now they're looking at the systematic dismantling of their number one proxy group in Hezbollah. So this may have actually put the ceasefire agreements on more of a trajectory for success based on that. It's likely Israel is looking at this as a big success, as it was for them, and they might be more willing to talk about a ceasefire, and Hezbollah might be looking to preserve their very existence. Because if there is a ground invasion, it might look very different than the invasion in 2006.
Yeah, well, we've been talking to you. We've got the news that Prime Minister Netanyahu has just arrived back in Tel Aviv, and he's arrived back to the sound of air raid sirens. Missiles have been fired, and we understand intercepted as well, fired from Yemen. In terms of what Israel does next, now that Benjamin Netanyahu is back in his office, we assume, do you think there's an appetite there in Israel for a ground invasion?
I do, especially if these rockets and missiles and drones keep coming, especially from Hezbollah inside Lebanon. I think most of what you've seen when the pager attack, the push-to-talk radio, all these decapitation strikes on leadership are what's called shaping operations for what could be a ground operation. So if this was looked at in sequence for a military campaign, all this is leading up to an actual ground assault into southern Lebanon. And I think the Israelis understand that if they don't have some kind of cessation, reliable and consistent cessation of hostilities, 60,000 of their own citizens can't return to their homes in northern Israel, which makes Israel essentially losing territory based on this terrorist organization next door. I do think there is support in Israel for this. I was just out there, and it's clear from just the average person you talk to up to senior IDF folks who understand the challenges for sure, but realize that ultimately, if there's not a change in the current circumstances, that might be the only thing that actually forces a change.
In terms of keeping Washington in the loop, do you get the impression that, we hear that Washington didn't know about the strike on Nasrallah's headquarters yesterday. We were told last week that the Biden administration was unaware of the pager and walkie-talkie attacks. Do you think that's true? And if so, why isn't Israel keeping the United States in the loop?
So generally speaking, in what I would call a normal time, they do give the U.S. a heads up, particularly through the Pentagon, on strikes that they're taking in the region. Largely because the U.S. military has forces in the region and it needs to be prepared if there's a retaliation, which might not just come against Israel, it might also come against the United States as Israel's most important security partner. That is mostly a military coordination effort, not necessarily a political coordination effort. In other words, they don't ask for permission. They simply notify the Pentagon so that the Department of Defense is ready. In this case, it might be that when you have a very specific intel-driven operation, it's very time sensitive, and if you give the U.S. a heads up with too much time, essentially, it could be leaked, and I think that's a concern that's legitimate. And of course, if it's against U.S. policy, then they might not want to notify the White House until they have to. So it is a sensitive issue for sure with the United States. Sometimes the United States doesn't want to be notified ahead of time and make it look like we were in agreement and essentially gave the green light. So I think there's a lot of sensitivities in how this is delivered and how it's received by the United States, who again might not want to look like they were in coordination with Israel when they're trying to serve as a mediator for a ceasefire agreement.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you speaking to us. Mick Mulroy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to the former Director of Operations and Intelligence for the British Intelligence Service, Nigel Inkster. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me just start by asking you, presumably what happened in the Beirut suburbs last night was the result of considerable intelligence work, and we assume some leaks.
Yes, well, we don't know exactly how Israel has achieved the intelligence dominance over Hezbollah that it clearly enjoys at the moment. I suspect that it's a combination of technical means and also considerable human sources within the organization, which must be a major worry to what is now left of the leadership. I think that this is a situation where the Israeli intelligence services have been able to create something of a virtuous circle. So, for example, when some of the senior Hezbollah people injured in the pager attacks were taken to hospital, it's clear that Israel, in one case, was able to identify a significant visitor to one of these people, follow them back, and that's how they identified where a major meeting of the leadership was going to take place. So they're on a roll at the moment. There's no doubt about it. You know, they do clearly have a high level of intelligence dominance at the moment, and they obviously want to exploit that while it lasts, because these things in their nature never do last. Sooner or later, the adversary kind of wakes up and cleans out the mess, and you're then back, to a lesser level of coverage, lesser level of penetration. But at the moment, obviously, Israel wants to exploit its advantage for all it's worth.
So I just want to pick up on what you were just saying there about how Hassan Nasrallah's location could have been discovered. So you're saying that a hospital visit was it by Hassan Nasrallah himself that then revealed his...
No. This was in respect of another senior operational commander in Hezbollah who was killed in the raids several days before this attack on Nasrallah. And obviously, the Israeli intelligence services have a very good idea of who is of interest to them, who they need to keep an eye on, and considerable capacity to do this on the ground.
So basically what happens when an organization like Hezbollah is caught off guard, as they clearly were with the pager attacks, that's probably a moment, isn't it, when they're likely to make mistakes and they're essentially making themselves more vulnerable. Do you think there's some truth in that?
Yes, absolutely. This recent series of attacks must have, seriously unnerved the Hezbollah command structure, which is clearly what they were intended to do, and it's going to take time for Hezbollah to regroup. At the moment, they don't know who they can trust. They know there are leaks in the organization, but they won't know where they're coming from. At the moment, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for them to orchestrate a major witch hunt, given the challenges they face. But at some point, they're going to have to do it. And that in itself will be highly disruptive and debilitating for the operational effectiveness of the organization.
I heard some analysts suggesting that at the moment, intelligence in Lebanon is actually quite cheap. The country's been through economic turmoil. There are a lot of people who can't make a living, and therefore it's made it easier for Israel to recruit informants, recruit people who will infiltrate groups like Hezbollah. Do you think that's played a part in this?
Most definitely. That is one factor. The other factor is the degree of alienation that Hezbollah has created amongst many people within Lebanon. There are a lot of Lebanese who are absolutely outraged and disgusted by the way in which Hezbollah has both hollowed out the Lebanese state and put in a position where it is unwillingly dragged into the kind of conflict that we're now seeing. And I'm sure that the Israeli intelligence services are able to exploit both sets of motivation to get high levels of coverage on the ground.
Okay, well, I'm being told we're out of time, but it's been really great getting your insights. We really appreciate you talking to us. Nigel Inkster, former Director of Operations and Intelligence for the British Secret Intelligence Service. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.